Welcome to Hye Roots, Descendants of Ararat. I am George Ajayan, your host for this episode of the first series devoted to Armenian genealogy. With each new episode of Hye Roots, we will explore different resources that will aid those wishing to learn more about their Armenian family history. Today, I am joined by Sevag Shirozian. Over the past 4 years, Sevag and I have worked together on the board of the Armenian Cultural Association of America. Welcome, Sevag.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, what you know about your family history, and what you were hoping to learn?
So I have grown up in the Philadelphia metro area. I've been here all my life. The reason why we are in Philadelphia is because years ago, my dad, when he was in Aleppo, Syria, wrote a letter to one of his uncles he knew that lived in Philadelphia, and that brought him over to America for a better opportunity. And we called him Keddy. I remember him as a child, but I don't know much more about him other than him having three daughters, and eventually they moved to the West Coast somewhere.
Interesting. So your family came from Aleppo. What year did the family come to the United States?
It was the late 60s, if I'm not incorrect. I think it was in 1969.
Okay, excellent. Well, we do have an oral history from that uncle, Sevag Davidian, and let's take a look inside the vault. As with so many genealogy questions related to Armenians that lived in the United States at any point in their lives, the best place to start is with Mark Arslan's Armenian Immigration Project website, and my personal preference is to make use of the combined query by standardized last name as noted in the first episode of this series. Here you can see all the records that have been extracted for people with variations of the name Sevag Davidian. Knowing that Sevag would have come to the United States after the genocide and that he was presumably from the Kharpet region, I first explored the person arriving on August 10, 1920. This person was joining a brother, Achadu, in New Britain, Connecticut. Selecting the embedded link for the brother opens the ship manifest abstract for Khachadur Davidian arriving in the United States on September 9, 1907. Images for these ship manifests can be accessed through either Ancestry.com or FamilySearch.org. The ship manifest for Khachadur contained a number of useful pieces of information. Specifically, the closest relative remaining in country whence came was a brother named Bolos, and the person he was joining was an uncle Garabed Kasparian in New Britain, Connecticut. In addition, the Armenian Immigration Project website included a number of additional records linked to Khachadur. Scanning these records, a couple of them stood out for supplying a specific location. The villages referred to as Shiro in the Kata region and Keferdiz in the Putugir region are in fact referring to the same place. Keferdiz, or Shiro, is now called Doğanyol. Around 400 Armenians and 50 households lived in Keferdiz on the eve of the genocide. Official Ottoman population figures are much lower. In 1894, Provincial Yearbook for Kharpet province claimed only 77 Armenian apostolics and 62 Catholics in the village. The Catholics presumably were Assyrian. The other records related to Khachadur supplied the names of the four brothers mentioned by Sevag in his recorded testimony: Khachadur, Sevag, Bedros, and Hagop. Based on Khachadur's using Bohos as a middle name, it seems likely that his ship manifest incorrectly referred to Bohos as a brother instead of father. However, this should be confirmed by additional research, making use of marriage and death records of the brothers. The confirmation that this was in fact the same Sevag Davidian that we were seeking was supplied in his petition for naturalization. The wife and children listed on the petition matched our Sevag, and the certificate of arrival confirmed the August 10, 1920 arrival in the United States on the SS Megali Hellas. Having identified the birthplace of the Davidian family and the brothers of Sevag, the second part of the request was to locate living descendants. I could not track Bedros after his arrival in 1908. It would appear that he returned to Keferdis and, based on Setrag's testimony, may have moved to the newly independent Armenia in 1918. While Hagop married, it does not appear that he had any children. That left Khachador. The 1940 United States Census listed 3 living children of Khachador and his wife, Siranush. The children's names were Edward, Beatrice, and Albert. The April 15, 1969 issue of the Hartford Courant newspaper contained a detailed obituary for Khachador with the names of family members. Obituaries are often the best source for trying to trace descendants. There are a number of resources available for accessing obituaries. Ancestry.com does sometimes contain links to obituaries that can also be accessed directly through newspapers.com. Genealogy Bank and MyHeritage also allow for searching newspapers. Chronicling America is a newspaper archive offered free from the Library of Congress. Lastly, for deaths over the last 15 years or so, a simple Google search will often result in an obituary stored on legacy.com. Let us now share with Sevag and a surprise guest the information we have learned. Welcome back, Sevag. Let me begin by giving some background on what we were able to learn about Setrag. He arrived in the United States in 1920, joining a brother, Khachador, in New Britain, Connecticut. With that piece of information, let me introduce you to one of your cousins, Karen, who is the grandchild of Khachador and his wife, Siranush. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I love being here.
It's really wonderful to be able to unite family together. As we know, during the genocide, it created a major disruption in all of our families, so many Armenian families. And even to this day, it takes sometimes this long for us to be able to reunite families and make those connections, which are always very, very special. Maybe, Karen, I know you're the granddaughter of Khachador, the brother of Setrag. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your grandfather, what he was like and what you know of the story of the family.
Oh my God, he was just amazing. And I remember when I was very young, I met Setrak. He lived in Philadelphia, I think. And I remember him well, a gentleman. My grandfather, they came to Connecticut from Turkey because that's where all the war industry was being built in the factories. They all came to the Sikorsky, Pratt and Whitney, Stanley Works. So he worked at Stanley Works. He always kept a huge Armenian garden wherever he lived in New Britain. We were all very close. The only thing I didn't do was learn Armenian. All I know is inch pestes. But they cooked and farmed in New Britain, and it was a huge, wonderful, loving family. And I'm so happy to meet my cousin. Are you in Watertown?
Philadelphia still.
In Philadelphia?
Yeah, yeah.
And do you remember a woman around Setrak's age named Angel? Angel?
I do not know. The only person I remember from that generation was Setrak, which we used to call Keri, because that's what my dad used to call him, Keri.
Yes, I think Angel was my grandmother's sister in Philadelphia. But it was a wonderful growing up with that generation, and it's just gone.
Well, after connecting with Karen and her brother Rick, I was able to capture further records related to the Davidian family, as well as the family of Khachadur's wife, Siranush Hovanesyan. Yet there are areas ripe for further research. Hagop's marriage and death certificates indicate his parents' names as Makar Davidian and Mary or Maria Maloyan. It would be useful to compare this to the marriage and death certificates of Khachadur and Setrag. So besides making the connection with Khachadur and his descendants, you had a question about where the family had come from originally. And I was able, through the records of the brothers that came to the United States, I was able to identify the records of the village as Keferdis, which is also known as Shiro, which is probably the origins of your surname, Shirozian. I was able to locate one Ottoman census for the village of Keferdiz, dated 1843, and there was only one household in particular with high probability as being your family. The household was headed by 90-year-old Tavit, who we can presume was the source of the Davidian surname his descendants carry to this day. Also living in 1843 were David's two sons, Nigolos and Hagop, as well as Hagop's two sons, Chachadur and Beros. While we cannot directly link the known family members with those contained in the 1843 census, it seems very likely that Chachadur, born around 1836, was the grandfather of Setrag, Chachadur, and their siblings. Hopefully one day the Turkish government will allow access to more recent Ottoman censuses that would allow us to bridge this gap. But until then, this will have to suffice. There is one other source, though, that may supply some answers. In Beirut, in 1940, a book was written by Hosep Kalajian about the Armenians of Shiro Keferdiz. The Library of Congress has a copy of the book, and this morning Khachik Muradian, the Armenian area specialist at the library, sent me images of the book. While I have not yet had a chance to read through the entire book, one image did catch my eye. This is Hagop Tavitian, who was also known by Aglo. He was a fierce fighter that protected the Armenians during the 1894 to 1896 Hamidian massacres. During those years, it is estimated that between 100 and 300,000 Armenians were killed. Based on the image and the naming conventions, we can assume that this Hagop was the grandson of the Hagop born around 1813, and thus the son of either Chachadur or Beros from that census. Quite possibly, Setrag and Chachadur's brother Hagop was named for this esteemed warrior. The book does also contain photos of Setrag and his brother Hagop in the United States, and I presume there will be much more information about the family contained in that book. One final note, I located a death notice in the January 14, 1956 issue of Haidenik Daily newspaper for Garabed Tavitian. From this notice, we learn that Garabed was a first cousin to Setrag, Chachadur, and Hagop, their fathers being brothers. Interestingly, from a personal perspective, one of the couples listed was my great-grandmother's sister and her husband, Khoret Krikorian. In fact, the address supplied at the bottom of the notice is their home address at the time. We also learn that Garabed had a brother, also named Chachadur, living in Aleppo, Syria. Garabed never married, so he has no living descendants. However, it would be interesting to learn more of what became of his brother Chachadur in Syria. I know some of this may be a bit overwhelming, but maybe you can share some of thoughts on what you have learned about your families today.
For me, it's we've always heard our last name came from a village that they were from, but we never had concrete information on where that village was or if it was even the right name from that perspective. But this is very eye-opening, and I'm looking forward to looking at the documents that you have found for us to look at. So.
Yeah, I know Karen as well. This was quite overwhelming, the amount of documents I was sending you over the course of a couple of days. I'm not
Well, I
sure.
printed them and have been going through them and understanding what I can understand, but it's true. My grandmother, Siranush, their family went from Turkey to Cyprus to Alexandria to New York. That's how they came. My grandfather, her father, which would be my great-grandfather, the Turks had not been there yet, but he had a dream they were coming and that they were going to slaughter everybody. And on that dream, he got the whole family to escape immediately to Cyprus. So that's part of the legend of that, how they came. My other half, my father, is Assyrian, and I'm sure you've come across a lot of Assyrians in your research with Armenians. They're the only Christians in that area of the world, so they intermarried a lot. So I'm half Assyrian. And Sevag, I bet you know some Assyrians.
We do know some, yeah. Yeah.
They're
In
very
the
close.
in the Worcester area, we have a significant Assyrian community that with a lot of intermarriage between the families. And in fact, this region where your families came from, the village itself was not large, was not a large village from an Armenian perspective. There were more Muslims in that village than Armenians, but there were about an equal number of Assyrians as there were Armenians, and that's attested to also in the Ottoman documents. So it makes sense that your family would have connections with that and even have intermarriage amongst both Christian populations would not have been uncommon. And I
They
think,
were also slaughtered by the Turks at the same time because they were Christian. And my Assyrian family came from northern Iran, but the Turks would just go over the border and slaughter them. They went to Seattle and came into America that way. But just as many Assyrians were killed during that time as Armenians.
yeah, particularly in those southeastern areas from Dikranaged, Mardin, and then southeast of that, Urmia in Iran, which is what you're talking about. That region as well is well known as being a large Assyrian concentration. And there are some very good documents and books written about their experiences as well during the genocide. So we do have some of that documentation. Interestingly, they came through Seattle, so they probably essentially went around the world to get to the United States, presumably is their path. Again, something that is common, happened, not common, but did happen quite frequently, that they went through the Trans-Siberian Railroad across Russia and Yokohama, Japan, and then to Seattle, and then that would have been most likely the path they took.
And I'll tell you, so my Assyrian grandmother's village fled in the middle of the night. They went over a mountain, over a river, they got to Georgia, Russia. They stayed there for a few months, and then the boarding house owner said to my grandmother, if you want to go to America, you better leave now because they're going to kill the Tsar tonight. And they killed the Tsar. It took 2 years to cross Russia. She said they never knew where if anybody saw a train, they got on it, not knowing where it would go. So they zigzagged across Russia. It took 2 years to get to Japan. Quite a story.
I hope you found this useful in your own Armenian family history research. And if you have a question for a future episode, please send it to hyroots@haidanic.com.